New imperialism. All right, you guys ready for this? It's not the old imperialism, but the new one. So this is a lecture on the motives and tools of new imperialism, and we're going to do an image analysis after this lesson. So what we're talking about today is new imperialism from 1750 to 1900. Actually, 1900 would be about the height of that new imperialism. This is the old imperialism, if you remember correctly. Remember Great Britain extending and creating the 13 colonies, territories here and territories in what we call Canada today. France extending their domain here, right? And Spain taking over all this area, Portugal taking this piece. If you notice, in Africa, Europeans are only along the coast. Same in India, right? And you see the expansion of Russia. So the old imperialism is not that deep into Africa, not that deep into India, but it is all over Latin America. Then we get the revolutions, right? Once the revolutions hit, you still have this area held by Great Britain. And once again, they continue to stay around the coast, but cannot seem to penetrate inland for many reasons, right? This is the new imperialism. All of a sudden, the Americas stay intact with these exceptions here. But the new imperialism is really deep in Africa, India. Now, the Americas and China are part of what we call economic imperialism, which we'll also discuss in this unit. Right? So what were the motives for the new imperialism? The first one? Well, not the motives. Let's talk about the definition. Definition of new imperialism: the industrialized global north expanding their empires into the global south to control peoples economically, politically, and culturally. Economically, politically, and culturally. So this is about complete control over another population, right? And the main reason for what's at the heart of this whole thing is industrialization. Industrialization and the need for raw materials. So capitalism is at the core of it all. And that need for raw materials for production in the factory. We've talked about this pretty extensively, so you should know this concept already. That they need also new markets to sell those goods. So economically, it's a twofold thing. You need raw materials and new markets. There's an additional factor in keeping rebellion down in the industrialized countries. So in order to keep people employed as well. Now, I didn't put that down as one of the motives, but you might want to throw that in there as one of the motives, keeping people employed, right? So you got things like tea, right? Tea being grown in these other areas and being exported and taken to Europe and the United States. Lipton tea, one of the big ones, right? Diamonds in South Africa. This is the diamond mine in Kimberley, South Africa, so that people could enjoy diamonds in the industrialized North. If you remember, this is what we talked about, economic dependency, about the global North needing raw materials and needing global markets to export and sell those materials to increase profit. Again, the key and the core of this whole thing is profit. How can you maximize your profits? And what happens with the global south is you become economically dependent on exporting those raw materials. And usually countries stick to one or two exports. So, for example, they'll export only coffee and sugar. And if people stop drinking coffee for whatever reason, it'll affect their entire country's economy. That's economic dependency. All right. Another factor is nationalism and the continual competition by Europeans against one another. Continual competition between European empires. If you remember, we talked about nationalism and how people create a national identity through a shared culture, but it also creates a view of the other and the fact that there are people other than the ones that are like you, right? If you remember when we talked about the initial exploration period and that there was competition, political competition between feudal states and cultural competition between Catholic Christians and Protestant Christians and Muslims trying to spread their own kind of religion, as well as economic factors. Those kind of, some were similar, some were different. This is something you might want to sit down and create your own um, graphic organizer or mental map where we talk about differences and similarities between the old imperialism and the new imperialism. There might be some essay on continuity and change, some short question on continuity and change. So you want to kind of hash that out in your own head. All right. We have this cartoon here that kind of shows the continual competition that Europeans were had between one another. And you see Russia eating everybody up. They're trying to defend themselves against Russia and so on and so forth. Right. Then there's the real reasons, capitalism and nationalism, and then there's the justifications. And the justifications were to spread Christianity. Right. That's how they justified the extending control into other countries. Well, we're trying to spread Christianity. That sounds like a good thing to some folks, right? Except if you're not a Christian. And the other one is scientific racism in the form of social Darwinism. So, in order for me to explain social Darwinism, I'd have to explain Darwinism in the first place. What is Darwinism? Um, and how does that create what is called the white man's burden, or the burden to civilize other people? So that's kind of how they justified it as well. Like, well, we have to go, civilize all these savages, bring civilization to them, right? So let me explain Charles Darwin. So Charles Darwin comes up with the idea of survival of the fittest, right, and evolution, but he applies it to animal species, right? And what he says basically is that there are certain species, like say for example this butterfly that's a bit transparent or a bit lighter, right? And then there's this other butterfly that's not so light, and they live in an environment where predators are going to go after the butterflies. Well, this butterfly is more likely to be eaten because it can be seen. It's not necessarily that it's more fit or stronger or smarter. It just happens to be that in that environment, the adaptation of that butterfly doesn't fit that particular environment. It fits this one, who is a bit lighter. And therefore, that lighter one can then procreate, and more lighter butterflies then survive. That's the science behind survival of the fittest, right? What people began to do is to take these scientific theories and began to apply them to society and say that if you're white and you happen to have better weapons and what we consider a better society, then you are more fit than these folks that are not, right? And you start getting these ideas of races. Remember that in the Enlightenment and in the scientific revolution, people began to categorize. So automatically people are, well, if we look different, we must then categorize people different, right? And if we start categorizing people differently, then there are some that are better and others that are not. You start creating a hierarchy, right? Um, you know, Unfortunately, these guys didn't have the science that we have today with genes and actual science. So this is considered now more of a pseudoscience. This isn't a real science anymore. It's more of a pseudoscience, right? And this is what, again, a cartoon symbolizing that idea of a white man's burden, and again showing that the United States and Great Britain have that responsibility to bring these, you know, uncivilized folks up to civilization. Now let's remember that China and India, as well as places in West Africa and South Africa and East Africa, and in Latin America, had civilizations that spanned back thousands of years, but well before any Europeans went into the interior of these places. So here's another cartoon of the United States trying to civilize Cuba and Puerto Rico and Hawaii. Right? And you got the Native Americans in the back as well, and the immigrant Chinese. Right? Now these are the regular students that are doing well. Right? There's a poor guy back here cleaning. All right, and you see this in advertising. You see it all the time, right? You see this child here giving them the soap, cleaning them up, and making them look better. And these are only a few advertisements, but you see it in advertising today. The Dove got in trouble for this a while back for pulling the same old stunt that these other folks had in previous advertisements. Right. So again, we got the actual motives, and that's capitalism and nationalism, and then the justifications for imperialism. Now let's talk about the tools. What tools were they able to use to get into the interior? Remember that at first, Europeans were unable to get into the interior of Africa and into the interior of India and into China. How were they able to conquer? Well, first and foremost, that same industrialized technology. So that means rifles and battle tactics, right? So due to the Industrial Revolution, there was the invention of the Maxim gun, right? And this is a quote from Hilary Pierre Renee. Said, "Whatever happens, we've got the Maxim gun, and they have not." The repeating machine gun is actually one of the reasons that not only the African nations who vehemently resisted, but also the Native Americans of the plains were able to be defeated. Both groups were able to be defeated because of this new technology and the train, right? And battle tactics, right? You have these guys doing what's called the pincer movement, right? Surrounding folks, eventually to wear them down, right? And then there is quinine. Quinine. Remember that not only were Africans able to fight back Europeans with before the Maxim gun, because they all, each group had swords, each group had similar kind of weapons, so the battles were a bit more fair. But there was also disease, and that is malaria. The people of the central part of Africa were already had the malaria disease. So a lot of them were immune, and Europeans were not immune to malaria, so they couldn't get into the interior because they would die. So a lot of their business was along the coast, right? So I'll get into the steamships, but let's talk a little bit more about the quinine. This medicine was able to kill that malaria, not necessarily kill it or cure it, but it was able to kind of slow down the effects to the point where Europeans were able to get into the interior and battle it out and win with the new machine guns and the new medicines. So now let's start talking about the other things, right? Steamships. Now, in order to move the steamships quicker, Europeans were able to create a couple of things, and here's one of them. And this is the Suez Canal. They were able to dig out a man-made canal, river, that basically cut across from Europe directly into the Middle East. You didn't have to go around Africa anymore. You get in there and you're good to go, right? So instead of going all the way around Africa, these 16,000 kilometers, you were able to go around. And the same with the Panama Canal. Instead of going all the way around South America. Now, it wasn't just the distance that was dangerous in going around South America and South Africa. It's also that these shores down here are full of ice and winds and difficult to navigate. And even with steamships, it's kind of hard to get around the ice. So um, this made it a lot simpler, a lot better, a lot faster. And this is how the Panama Canal works. Steamship goes in here, gets closed off, the water level goes up, goes into the next one, closed off, water level goes up, and so on and so forth, and they can get through. So that's basically how it works. As you can see here, eventually you get to the very top, and you move right on in. And that's essentially how the lock system kind of works in the Panama Canal. Okay. The other thing that kind of kept or maintained their empires, other than steamships and canals, was the railroad. So those were very, very important to be able to ship things. The telegraph as well, to be able to communicate quickly. Right. So the steamships, railroads, telegraph, and canals were able to help them maintain the empires. Now, and again, these were the colonial empires. And this is Great Britain. They used to say the sun never sets on the British Empire. Why? Because no matter what time of the day, or no matter where in the world, it's always, the sun is always in some part of the British Empire, no matter what. They have a country in every time zone. Okay? So the activity now that we're going to do comes from a book, a children's story book, right? Called ABCs for Baby Patriots from Great Britain. You're going to see some images, and what you're going to do is you're going to read it and find the pages that reflect the motives and tools associated with imperialism. You're going to use this handout. You're going to write down the letter that you're using. You're going to specify whether it's a motive or a tool being used in that letter, and then explain in at least 2 words or phrases why you think that particular picture supports that choice of it being a tool or a motive. Okay? Identify how that art in that letter supports your choice. Okay? And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. We are donezo.